He believes that every single birth, including yours, is a tragedy. For him, having children is not just morally questionable, but actually cruel. The kindest thing humanity could do is simply stop existing. This isn't some internet troll or doomsday cult leader. This is David Benatar, a serious academic at the University of Cape Town, whose book, Better Never to Have Been, has sparked one of the most uncomfortable debates in modern philosophy. And the more we delve into the details, the more disturbing the facts we will encounter. And I'll reveal the shocking mathematical argument that even the happiest person alive would have been better off never being born. This view is called antinatalism. Its philosophy argues bringing new life into this world is fundamentally wrong. Let's start with a simple question. When you think about having kids, what comes to mind? Maybe the joy of watching them take their first steps, teaching them to ride a bike, or seeing them graduate. These are beautiful moments, right? But David Benatar asks us to flip the script entirely. He wants us to focus on something else, all the suffering that child will inevitably experience. That beautiful baby will one day feel heartbreak. They'll experience physical pain, disappointment, anxiety, and fear. They'll watch loved ones die. They'll face rejection, failure, and eventually their own mortality. Now here's where Benatar's argument gets really interesting. He presents what he calls the asymmetry argument, and it's going to mess with your head. Imagine two scenarios. In the first, a person exists and experiences both pleasure and pain throughout their life. In the second, that same person never exists at all. Benatar argues that the pain in the first scenario is definitely bad. No argument there. But here's the twist. The absence of pleasure in the second scenario isn't bad, because there's no one there to be deprived of it. Meanwhile, the absence of pain in the second scenario is definitely good, even if there's no one there to enjoy being pain-free. This creates what philosophers call an asymmetry. The good things about existence don't outweigh the bad things about existence when compared to non-existence, because non-existence eliminates all the bad, while the absence of good doesn't count against it. Still with me? Let's make this concrete with an example. Imagine you're deciding whether to have a child. If you have the child, they might become a brilliant scientist who cures cancer and lives a fulfilling life. But they'll also experience countless moments of suffering, stubbing their toe, being rejected by their first crush, losing their grandparents. If you don't have the child, they won't experience that suffering, which Benatar says is good. And they won't experience the joy of scientific discovery either. But since they don't exist, they're not being deprived of anything. This is where most people's brains start to rebel against the logic. We intuitively and instinctively feel like existence is better than non-existence. But Benatar challenges us to examine why we feel that way. He points out that we already accept this logic in certain situations. We don't feel sorry for all the potential people who could have existed, but you don't lie awake at night feeling bad for the billions of possible children that will never be born. But we do think it would be wrong to bring a child into the world if we knew for certain they would live a life of pure agony. Benatar takes this one step further. He argues that all lives contain enough suffering to make existence a harm, even the happiest lives imaginable. Here's another mind-bending aspect of his philosophy. Benatar claims that people are systematically wrong about how good their own lives are. He calls this the Pollyanna principle, our tendency to focus on positive experiences and downplay negative ones. We adapt to suffering, we rationalize our pain, and we convince ourselves that our lives are better than they actually are. Think about your worst day last year. At the time, it probably felt devastating, but now you might barely remember it. Or you've found ways to see it as a learning experience. Benatar argues this psychological mechanism evolved to keep us functioning, but it also blinds us to the true amount of suffering in our lives. He points to studies showing that people consistently overestimate their own happiness and life satisfaction. We're wired for optimism, even when that optimism isn't justified by the facts. Now, you might be thinking, okay, but what about all the amazing experiences? What about love, art, discovery, connection? Benatar doesn't deny that these things exist, but he argues that pleasure and pain aren't symmetrical in how they affect us. Consider this. You can be perfectly happy, and then one tragic event can destroy that happiness instantly. But if you're miserable, no amount of good fortune can instantly make all that suffering disappear. Pain demands our attention in ways that pleasure doesn't. You can ignore being comfortable, but you can't ignore being in agony. This brings us to one of the most controversial aspects of antinatalism, the idea that humanity should gradually phase itself out. Benatar isn't advocating for mass suicide or genocide. He's not saying existing people should stop living. Instead, he's arguing that we should stop creating new people. In his vision, the last generation of humans would live out their natural lives, and then the human experiment would simply end. To many people, this sounds absolutely horrific. The end of love, art, science, everything we hold dear. But Benatar asks, who would miss it? If there are no humans left to experience loss, then there is no loss. And think about all the suffering that would be prevented. No more war, starvation, disease, heartbreak, or death. All the future victims of violence, all the children who would grow up in poverty, all the people who would struggle with mental illness. None of that suffering would ever happen. Critics of Benatar often point out that his philosophy seems to conflict with our deepest intuitions about life and meaning. They argue that even if life contains suffering, it also contains transcendent experiences that make it worthwhile. The love between parents and children, the beauty of a sunset, the satisfaction of overcoming challenges. Some philosophers have tried to poke holes in the asymmetry argument itself, claiming that the absence of pleasure in non-existence should count as bad, just like the absence of pain counts as good. Others have questioned whether Benatar's pessimistic assessment of human existence is accurate. Maybe our psychological biases toward optimism exist for good reason. Maybe life really is better than he thinks. But here's what makes Benatar's argument so unsettling. It's not easy to dismiss. Even if you disagree with his conclusions, he forces us to confront uncomfortable questions. How much suffering is acceptable in a life? Do we have the right to make that choice for someone else? When we decide to have children, we're gambling with someone else's well-being. We're betting that their life will contain enough good to justify all the inevitable bad. And we're making this bet without their consent, for someone who can't opt out if we're wrong. Some people find comfort in religious or spiritual beliefs that frame suffering as meaningful or necessary. Others believe that the capacity for joy and love makes any amount of suffering worthwhile. But Benatar challenges us to examine whether these beliefs hold up to rational scrutiny, or whether they're just comforting stories we tell ourselves. Whether you find his arguments convincing or horrifying, antinatalism forces us to think more deeply about fundamental questions we usually take for granted. Why do we assume existence is better than non-existence? How do we weigh pleasure against pain? What responsibilities do we have to future generations? So here's that shocking mathematical argument I mentioned at the beginning. According to Benatar's asymmetry logic, even if your life has been 99% happiness and only 1% suffering, you would still have been better off never being born. Because that 1% of suffering is definitely bad, while the 99% of happiness you'd miss out on by not existing isn't bad, since there would be no you to be deprived of it. The math is brutal and unforgiving. In Benatar's framework, existence can never win the comparison against non-existence. That's why he believes humanity should end. Not through violence or catastrophe, but through the simple recognition that bringing new consciousness into a world of inevitable suffering might be the cruelest thing we do. Thanks for watching.